The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
What matters and what does not when it comes to character concerns.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Now that Dane Brugler's beast is out with some background information, some clarity on some of these prospects, there's the Bob McGinn articles, and he does those every year. He talks to a lot of anonymous scouts and executives, and there's some dirt, and there's some, I think, some really bad scouts out there. I find it funny. So Tyleik Williams is one of the prospects the 49ers have brought in. No character concerns that I know of with Tyleik Williams, big kind of nose tackle prospect that we both liked when we put on the tape crock. And in Bob McGinn's article, there is one scout that talks about him. Oh, yeah, true nose tackle, really good run stuffer, this and that, talks about his strengths and weaknesses. Then there's a second scout that's like, oh, clearly 3 technique, and starts talking about his strengths and weaknesses. I'm like, one of these dudes has to be fired. Because you are bad at your job if you are that off from what reality is, right? In these 2 different scenarios of what a prospect is. Because it's not that hard when you're watching a prospect to find out what a guy is. And I know which one we think this guy is. And one of those scouts is way off. And I wish I knew who he was or what team he scouted for. Because dude should be handed his papers because he's not good at his job.
I think you'd be surprised with the scouts and just how they get in there. There's a lot of, I think it's kind of thrown out there with like guys like Kyle Shanahan and Mike Shanahan and the Kubiak hires and all that, where there's a little bit of nepotism. And
a lot of it.
It's the same for these scouts too. I don't know how they vet guys or women, because there are some women scouts out there, but essentially scouts, some of them, they're just not very good at it. And I don't think everybody knows exactly what they're looking for. So they have some things that's, there for people to kind of learn and be a tool. The Scouting Academy. And I actually took the Scouting Academy. I paid for it. I think it's a great course. But still there's a part of it there's like this feel for a prospect and what they are and what they are. And you can evaluate a prospect and it not work out, and your evaluation actually be right. But there's other reasons why it didn't work out. Maybe not understanding the player's personality. Maybe the player just didn't work as hard when they got to the NFL or work the same as they did to get to this point, right? Like there's some things that are a little bit out of your control, but identifying what the prospect is, that part isn't hard. You just don't know sometimes if it's going to hinder them going to the next level. A guy like Richard Sherman, he wasn't the fastest guy. I bet they had a lot of, terrific ball skills, played on the other side of the ball. He's a long-rangey guy, maybe, does well in zone, but man, he's not that fast, right? Like, and so they got the evaluation probably right, but maybe they didn't know exactly how it's going to carry over to the NFL level. Same with Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy, if you look at his scouting report, it's pretty spot on.
It's right. Yeah.
He's kind of this burly quarterback, likes to play in rhythm, would thrive more in a play action passing offense that relies more on timing and rhythm over having a big arm, right? They got the evaluation right. It was when he got taken, and you never know, are there some other things that this guy has that's going to make it to where those things aren't an issue? And clearly Brock has. He's made it to where he's like, dude, I don't got the biggest arm, but man, I do these things so well that whatever limitations I have physically, I can kind of overcome that. The mental part of things, being a leader, having a lot of experience, right? Taking those things into account. So it's interesting with scouts. Typically, they do a good job with that, but sometimes when you just don't get the right position for a certain guy, that's the part that gets a little weird.
Absolutely. I believe this is your guy, Rob Lauder, Lieutenant Sipplejack in the chat.
Yeah. Shout out to my guy, Rob.
He brings up a great quote from George Carlin, fantastic. He says, quote, somewhere out there is the worst doctor in the world, and someone has an appointment to see him tomorrow. So yeah, that scout might be in your building, and you hope it's not the team that you root for that is employing that scout. So let's go to the character stuff, Croc. And I'm going to read through some of the reports for some of these guys. And I think some of the big ones are some that the San Francisco 49ers have brought in, and they're doing their vetting process. And look, I've been a hiring manager before, and I know I've sat across from the table from someone. I don't know anything about their past. I don't know if they've been arrested for something, but I sat across from them for 10 minutes in an interview and was like, I don't want to work with that person every day. And I didn't hire him, right? So I can imagine what it's like for, a 50-year-old executive to sit across from a 22-year-old kid and be like, oh my God, this guy, I don't know what to do with him, right? And not want him in the building. But that's the difficult part is the human element of it is way more difficult than the football aspect of it and the height, weight, speed, and what style of player a guy is. So when it comes to, I'm going to start with Mike Green, because he's one of the best pure pass rushers in this draft, defensive end out of Marshall, and how he ended up at Marshall is a crucial part of all of this. And so I'm going to go to Brugler's Beast for this one because he's got a little bit more clarity on what the situation is for Mike Green, and then we can kind of make our.
Hold on, Peacock. Real quick, I have a question before we get into that.
Yeah.
How much does character matter to NFL teams?
I think it matters a lot depending on what it is, because some guys are weirdos. You think about like wide receivers, right? Like Terrell Owens. You might have some character concerns there, but he was one of the all-time greats. Randy Moss was a weirdo sometimes. You go Antonio Brown, you go Tyreek Hill, right?
Well, first of all, hold on.
What are you gonna look past? Was that
receivers? I think they're known to be divas a little bit.
You almost wanted. You got to be a little bit off to be a great receiver, because you have to grind out every play like you're going to get the ball, but you're only going to get the ball 8 times out of 40 routes or whatever, right? So I think you have to be wired a certain way. And I think DBs are kind of in that same group a little bit as well.
Yeah. But linemen, though, right? Like Jalen Carter. He had some off-field stuff, and it started to look a little crazy, and he's kind of fleeing the scene of a crash that, people lost their lives in, and there were some other things going on with him. It was like, well, the Eagles were like, well, we're still taking him top 10.
Yeah, and it's like, well, we got some of his buddies from Georgia to keep him in line.
Were his issues too rich for like 3rd or 4th overall? And again, I don't remember how that draft board fell, but were there teams that were like, oh, we really like him, but man, because of these issues, if we're picking at 8, we would take him, but picking at 3, can't do it. Like what? Because picking a player is still top 10, picking them at 8 or 9, and he has kind of these red flags. It's
with Jalen Carter, I think
big swing.
The situation with Jalen Carter was teams would have taken him based on talent, and they didn't. So basically, they took him off their board, at least with their first round pick. He would have gone top 5 probably. So it was too rich for those teams. The Eagles were in a situation where they had extra picks, felt like they had some Georgia teammates, they could keep them in line, and they felt okay with it. So that's like a per team basis. And I think that's kind of what it might be for someone like Mike Green, where if you're uncomfortable with it, you're just not going to draft them, right? It doesn't matter if it's 13 or 11 or 4 or 21, right? You're just not going to draft them unless it's, he gets so far down the list where you're like, well, he's in the 3rd round now. We kind of have to take a chance on him, and maybe we'll draft him now. Or maybe you wouldn't even still then, and he just wouldn't be on your draft board anymore. But what is and
that's like Honey Badger, right? Like when the Honey Badger.
Right, and he felt quite a bit.
Everybody knew he was a great player, but, he had the marijuana stuff going on, and he slid to the 3rd round.
Great point by Cynthia. Got burned by Reuben Foster. And that was an interesting player, because if you're doing weird stuff and you're not available for your football team, well, it's the ultimate red flag. And it's the ultimate character concern that you can't even play the sport for your team, right? Obviously, there's a couple of great examples of guys who were really mostly hurting themselves, like Josh Gordon. Would Josh Gordon even be would he have even been suspended in this day and age in the NFL for some of his substance problems, right?
Yeah, because I don't think it was just marijuana.
There was
I think
more
he had
to it. Yeah.
some hardcore stuff going on.
Yeah, I think there's maybe some nose candy involved and some other things like that. I don't want to overstep. I don't remember exactly what it was. It was more than just alcohol, but alcohol was a big part of it. And then we saw firsthand Alden Smith, right? And how awesome he was, but how short that career was because of problems off the field. So it absolutely matters, and it's going to impact whether you get a guy who's good at all, available at all, or maybe he's good and then just gives you headaches. Maybe he ruins your locker room. So there's a lot of different ways that this can go. And so that's why I want to talk about some of these, and we can kind of go through this with the information we have and be like, yeah, is this something that you think you would want to mess with? Because there can be football character, which is they don't care about the sport and they won't try hard, so they're not going to maximize what they are. And then there's off-field character, and there's, literal criminals potentially as well, where it's like Ray Caruth. It's like, okay, that goes a certain direction, right? That's the ultimate one. What's his name over there in
Hey,
New
Ray
England?
Cruz just got out of jail too. Like,
Did he get out of jail?
He's out.
Wow.
But his son, it's not a great situation. The kid lived.
The kid, yeah. Oh my God. That's one of the worst ever, right there. And obviously, what's his name, tight end over there in New England, who didn't make it out of prison, is another one. So like, there's a lot of different types of character issues, right? Yeah, some kickers get clearly. Even if kickers can have some character problems, the league doesn't care that much. So which things do we care about? Let's get into some of these. And we do have some information from anonymous scouts, from journalists alike. Aaron Hernandez, thank you. I don't know why I couldn't think of his name. That's a bad situation there. You don't want those on your football team. Let's put it that way.
The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action right now. When you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if that bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting easy, whether it's picking my favorite teams or diving into player props, from three-pointers to steals to assists. There's so many ways to bet. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance for an even bigger win. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. 5 paths the Packers could take in the first round.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast.
I want to go through scenarios today. We did this a couple weeks ago, and I think it's worth doing again now that we have a better feel for the if-then scenarios. We think, anyway, we have an idea of where the Packers are looking, where they're focusing resources, where this draft is ultimately shaking out. And I think it's important, actually, that we start at the end. And by that, I mean the third round. This is a critical thing to dig into a little bit, because I think the Packers are going to take a receiver with one of their first 2 picks. I think they're going to take a pass rusher with one of their first 2 picks in a perfect world for them. So, what does that mean with their third round pick? The more that I look at this, and I have the 2025 consensus board from The Athletic. So they're taking, this is what the media consensus is around these players. And I see an awful lot of offensive linemen in that third round range. Now, I think the Packers need to find an interior offensive lineman. And they need to do that in a way that makes sense for them. Now, when they drafted Sean Ryan, they used a 3rd round pick on him. When they drafted Josh Myers, they used a 2nd round pick on him. I don't expect them to do that in a draft where you feel like you need to get premium position players. So the Packers have the 87th overall selection. In that range, Tate Ratledge, interior offensive lineman from Georgia. Jared Wilson, interior offensive lineman from Georgia. Wyatt Millum, a tackle convert to play guard or center from West Virginia. Cameron Williams, who's a tackle, probably stays a tackle, but could be a guard from Texas. Charles Grant, who is purely a tackle, but maybe he's light, you convert him to center Anthony Belton from North Carolina State. A little bit further down, but they had him in for a visit. Emory Jones, offensive tackle from LSU. They had him in for a visit. That's a lot of offensive linemen that I named from 79th on the consensus board to 96th on the consensus board. That's a nice big band. And what did I named 6 guys. That's a nice group. I think that the 3rd round pick is where I think Green Bay could surprise some folks with, an idea kind of off the board, whether it's a safety, whether it's a linebacker. We'll get into that when we go through some of these scenarios. But the more that I look at this, the more that I think this ends up with an offensive lineman in round 3, but an interior offensive lineman. Now, whether that is someone who played on the interior or is a tackle convert, they're going to have some options there. Tate Ratledge, he played on the interior. The Packers don't tend to take guys, except for centers. They don't tend to take interior players who played on the interior. Tate Ratledge played guard. Now, he tested like an elite athlete at that position. But would they take someone who played guard to play guard? I know that seems like a weird thing to say, but that is a thing for the Packers. Now, on the other hand, you've got someone like Jared Wilson, who, by the way, 21 years old, will be 22 in June. We're talking about someone who played center. All teams, or second team All SEC, was the starting center last year. Center, played center. That would tell us something about Elton Jenkins. We've talked about some of that stuff. So I wanted to get that part of this out of the way before we go into some of the scenarios. And let's start with what I think is the scenario that if the Packers had to pick, they would pick. And that is they find an edge rusher in the 1st round. That is the cleanest situation for them. Because you get a Donovan Ezeraku, 26th right now on the consensus board. They get a Mykel Williams, right now 15th on the consensus board. I'd be surprised if he fell. Shamar Stewart is 16th on the consensus board. I would not be surprised if he's there at 23. James Pierce at 20. I would be a little surprised if he's the pick. And based on the kinds of players that they are showing the most interest in, it seems clear to me that they would prefer to take a true pass rushing edge in the 1st round when it comes to drafting pass rushers. We'll get to the defensive tackle of it all coming up. So if they get one of those guys, and I think Donovan Ezeraku as likely as any, and I think he's most likely to be there. So let's go with him here. Okay, 26th overall player, but the Packers have extra intel, Boston College. This is where the Packers make their money. 2nd round receivers. Jaden Higgins, the 47th overall player. I wouldn't be surprised if he went sooner. The backup plan to me is Jack Besh. He's creeping up the board. 55 overall. Do not be surprised if the Packers use the 54th overall pick on Jack Besh. That is, as of this moment, exactly where the consensus has him. Trey Harris at 61 also fits. So when you just look at trying to project, okay, what makes the most sense and where are the sweet spots in the draft for those players, early 20s is right where all these pass rushers are going to be, if not coming off the board, close to off the board. And then right in the late 40s, early 50s, that's where you're going to see Jaden Higgins, Jack Besh, and Trey Harris all come off the board. And maybe Jalen Royals, he's at 69 here. Jalen Noel, 66. The thing is, you cannot wait until 87. Once you get to 87, there's just nothing here. So That's what the Packers are looking at here. So then where do they go after that? This is the offensive line conversation. I think Jared Wilson is maybe not the ideal. I like the idea of someone like Wyatt Millum because you're getting that positional versatility. Didn't test, on the outstanding end for a tackle, but for a guard, right in the range where you like, but played tackle at West Virginia. 7.85 relative athletic score as a tackle, 6'6", 313. That's for the Packers. That's definitely a guard. And I think that he would make a lot of sense. Charles Grant, maybe more like a center. But the Millum, the versatility, he's 88th on the consensus board. That makes a ton of sense. For the Packers, you got a 2026 need at guard. If you can't work out an extension that makes sense for Sean Ryan on the low end, I think he can make plenty of money. I would expect he's not a Packer in all likelihood unless you're moving on from Elton Jenkins, in which case you need a center. Jared Wilson, the higher player on the board, but he's a center probably only. Fits the prototypes that the Packers would want. One of those two guys in the third round. That's your sort of nice middle road outcome. Edge, receiver, tackle, guard. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast.
So we'll start with Travis Hunter. I still want to talk about Shedeur, though, as well. So we'll get to that in the second sort of segment here. But as I think about Travis Hunter, obviously the number one thing everyone talks about is the fact that he can play both ways. And he has said he wants to play both ways. I want to ask you, though, Kevin, do you think he has a chance to be more successful as a corner or as a wide receiver at the NFL level?
Yeah, I love this question. Locked On Buffs fans hate this answer that I give because I always preface this with this portion right here. Do I think Travis Hunter can play both ways? Absolutely. I think he's a gifted, generational athlete. I think he's probably, had he focused on either position specifically in college, he'd probably be DB1 and wide receiver 1, which he might even be already at both right now. Yeah. That being said, I think once you get to the NFL level, I think you have to play him at wide receiver. Realistically, I think he's best with the ball in his hands. And I also don't really know how teams would feel about him sort of being a part-time whatever, right? If he's playing wide receiver 75% of the time, that's 25% of the snaps that he's not playing because he's playing defense, which means he's taken away from the offense. And then defensively, it's are you really getting the most out of him if you're only using him in certain packages? And so I think the best way to maximize him is at one position. And I think that position, if I were him, I'd want to play receiver, right? You get to score touchdowns, you get more money, career longevity, right? No one can touch you really. They don't allow contact anymore in the NFL. So why would you not want to play wide receiver? And I think that's where he's better off anyway.
It's funny you say that. You said, Buffs fans don't love that answer. I think Browns fans are actually loving hearing that answer because that is the thing that Andrew Berry talked about at the Combine over a month and a half ago. They view him more as a wide receiver than they do a corner, which was kind of shocking at the time because everybody was talking about Travis Hunter more so as a DB than a receiver, and so they kind of went against the grain in that way. I don't know. Your point is valid on how he bounces around between the two if he does actually play both ways. And I guess what do you know about how he handled that at the college level? Because it is like you're going in different meetings. There's defensive meetings. There's your position group meetings on both sides of the ball as well. There's offensive meetings. How does he kind of handled that and been able to sort of navigate that already? Because I'm not so worried about that. People are bringing that up a lot now. Like, how would he go between rooms, and how can he be part-time in some meetings and part-time in another, and then like out in the field doing different things? But I just kind of chalk that up to like, well, he's done it his whole career, so I'd imagine he'd figure it out at the NFL level as well.
Yeah, I would also like to preface it with Travis is probably the hardest working individual I've ever seen in the football space. He like craves playing every snap. Like he wants to. He's played over, I think he averaged over 120 snaps a game. Like there is no issue there. There's no issue in preparation. I saw a quote the other day, and this isn't an exact quote, so something along the lines, because someone was talking about Tetro McMillan saying he doesn't like to watch film.
I saw that, yeah.
Travis Hunter was like, I sleep for X amount of hours. The rest of the day, I have time to prepare for football. Like he is that dedicated to football. And so I don't really think there is a preparation issue at Colorado. And I think this is where it could be difficult in the NFL. They kind of catered to him in a sense, where it was like he didn't practice all the time. So they gave him more time to rest, right? Is an NFL team going to be willing to let a rookie, or even if he's third-year guy, be like, okay, Travis, Monday through Wednesdays, you're off. And Thursdays you join us for the walkthrough, and Friday or whatever, like whatever the schedule is, right? I don't know. I don't foresee that happening, because I don't think the NFL is really unless you're a quarterback, I don't see them like sort of catering to one individual player. That being said, he has done it, right? He's prepared with both. He's a savant at receiver. He's a savant at corner. I think he understands the game intellectually more than most people even realize is possible. And I think it just comes down to, and this is like the hard part about this whole situation, is how willing, in this case, would the Browns be to sort of adjusting the traditional norms of being an NFL player, right? Are they going to let him practice one day at receiver, practice another day at corner, have this day off? Are they going to put him on a pitch count? Are they going to be fine with putting him on a pitch count? Because Travis Hunter himself will be prepared. He wants to do this more than anything, right? I think he's been saying it. Deion Sanders has been saying it. He even said that he would tell Roger Goodell he wants him to announce him as a wide receiver and corner. So like he wants this really bad. But I think someone has to be the adult in the room and make the proper decision. And I don't know what that decision is, but I think Travis could do it. Doesn't mean he should, though.
Yeah, I like your point on like him being a rookie and getting days off potentially, because like we see that at the NFL level. Myles Garrett, for example, he gets like a veteran day off on Wednesdays. Like he doesn't practice, but he's a guy who's been in the league for 8 years. Like it's not easy to convince a team like, hey, we're giving this rookie, time off. Granted, he would maybe be playing both ways so they could understand it, but yeah, It's an interesting sort of dynamic there. I guess along those lines, like I've always felt it feels easier for him to be a defensive back and then like have a package on offense for him that maybe allows him to do a little bit of both. How do you kind of envision it being the opposite for him? Like how could a team like the Browns make him primarily a wide receiver and then still try to get him in on defense in your eyes?
Yeah, I think that's the hard part. I think it's easier to do what you said, like make him a corner and then throw him in on packages. But I think, and this is what I'll give you sort of like a prediction of what will happen. Like if the Browns draft him, or whoever drafts him, I think they'll entertain it for preseason, maybe even part of the season. And I think there's going to be a moment, whether it's maybe he gets a little banged up, whether it's his performance is slacking on one side of the ball, which I don't think will happen. Like I think Travis is going to be a really great player. That being said, I don't know if it's going to be able to sustain, because it's 17 games in the NFL minimum.
Yeah.
Right. And he has not played a full college season once. Like he missed 3 games, I think it was last year, missed part of a game this past season because he got banged up a little bit. This season he was more healthy, but I just don't know how you balance that, honestly. Like, there's not really an answer to your question, because the only way in my head is like you put him on a pitch count and then you're like, okay, we just spent the 3rd pick on this guy and he's only playing X amount of snaps per game and we needed him in crunch time, but he hit his pitch clock by the 3rd quarter, or we couldn't use him in the 3rd quarter because we wanted to save him for the 4th quarter. And by the time the 4th quarter rolled around, the game was over, right? So I just don't know how you find that balancing act. I think it comes down to a couple things, and you could attest to this more than anyone. It comes down to where they like him better, which obviously you said receiver. And 2, people forget the NFL is a business, right? So Travis Hunter wants to play both ways. I think, and this is like the shady side of the NFL, he's going to play 51% corner, 49% receiver. And then when it's time to pay him, they're going to view him as a corner and he's going to get paid less because that's how life works.
The financial part of this is fascinating and something that, maybe I'm not thinking about in the moment here, like a couple weeks out from the draft, but for his long term, though, like he's got to think about that stuff. So that's interesting. We'll end the Travis Hunter conversation with this. Obviously, his athleticism is something that's on full display. One of the biggest reasons why he can do what he does. One of the biggest reasons why he's so coveted at the top of the draft. Is there anything though you think that he does need to improve on at the next level, Kevin?
That's a good question. Honestly, not really. I think he is physical. I would just say his size, I guess, get the weight up a little bit. And that's kind of a natural criticism for every player going from the college to the NFL level. Because I think it's quite an endorsement, if you will, from Deion Sanders saying that Travis is way better than he was at this stage. So I feel like Deion Sanders was pretty good as a youngster in the NFL. And so for him to get that endorsement, I don't feel like there's any glaring issues. I would say the only one would be availability. Like I said, he has been injured. This past year, he was relatively healthy. The year before, he missed a few games. He missed a few games at Jackson State. I know he missed a few games his senior year of high school. So availability, right? And I think that also kind of boils down to the whole conversation we're having is like, do you want him out there that long if he's at risk of being injured? So I would just say availability, getting a little bit bigger and stronger. But he is a really good corner. Like you said earlier on the show, people viewed him as a prodigy at corner for like the longest time. And then all of a sudden, like, it felt like it happened like maybe, I don't know, like 5 days ago. Everyone's like, he's a wide receiver. And I'm like, where has this been? Right? Like it was always, he's a corner. He's a corner. Now it's like, he's got to be a receiver. I think people are just getting like in their heads about it. So I don't know. There's nothing really glaring that stands out because I think he genuinely loves the grind and understands what it takes to be great. Obviously, otherwise he wouldn't be pounding the table for a task this big.
Well, and you bring up the evaluations have certainly said that he should be a corner. I've already been thinking about him as a wide receiver since Andrew Berry made those comments at the combine. So that's kind of already been in my mind. But yes, 5 days ago, it does feel like is when it started to flip. That is the lowdown on Travis Hunter.